we are going to do something different. We're going to start our first kind of longer term project, which is going to be to build an RSS reader with Eleventy and modern CSS. So my two loves. And we're starting from zero. So today is the first stream in this series. And we're going to start by going over and creating together some project requirements. And we'll overview what Eleventy is first, and then dive into our project requirements. And then we'll kind of go from there. If you're unfamiliar with Jamstack, it stands for JavaScript, APIs, and Markup. And it's pretty closely tied with the idea of static site generators, which Eleventy is one of those. So this is what I have on screen right now is my site Eleventy Rocks, which is 11ty.rocks. I can pop that in the chat real quick. And so you can find a lot of materials about Eleventy over here, different things I've created. And so if you are completely unfamiliar, there are a variety of learning materials here, including this 3-minute video that will get you up and running, but we'll be going through those steps maybe at the end of today, and some other kind of beginner geared resources as well. But Eleventy, besides being my tool of choice, it really embodies this Jamstack idea, and particularly we can leverage what it offers for us for this app, where we're going to be reading from RSS data sources and manipulating those to turn around and display on a page somehow. Kind of a key thing to keep in mind is that since Eleventy is purely static, so there's no client-side JavaScript required, unlike something like React and Gatsby, where it needs to load React on the final, client side. So one little trick that we're going to have to kind of decide how we want to approach it is how to refresh our RSS feeds. And so we'll get there, but that will be probably our main challenge. The other thing about this particular project that may be a little unique from something you might be building for a client or something that is intended to be shared, is I really envision this as kind of a personal application. So one of the awesome things about Eleventy is that, and being developers, is that you can kind of build something for your own use, right? So we don't have to worry too much about whether this will load and work perfectly for, if you load it up on a website. We can go through that exercise and get it to that point. But you could also just build stuff like this for your own personal local use. So we can look at both paths there and decide which way we want to handle it. But just a little note about that. This idea of not necessarily outputting a website with these sorts of tools is something I've explored a few different ways. I've used Eleventy to create a web component generator, an email generator, a Houdini worklet generator, and actually my Twitch scenes that you see on this stream are made with Eleventy as well. So I'm kind of running with that idea, basically, that we don't have to produce a stereotypical website at the end of this. It can be something we just kind of spin up and run when we want to use it ourselves. So I kind of advertise this as we'll cover some modern CSS stuff as well. And that's just because that's my other thing. But also we will kind of consider how can we, not necessarily have to use a framework, but still do some nice things with layout to get us, this application. So hopefully you'll get a few tricks to take with you around that as well. When you think of something like RSS reader, what does that mean to you? Maybe we should talk about what that kind of means. And then what would be must-have features for you? Again, thinking of this as kind of your own personal thing, you could At the end of this, I'll certainly share this as a GitHub repo. And so we will, or you will be able to like take it and manipulate it. I'll essentially release it as an Eleventy starter. So you'll be able to reuse it and modify it however you see fit for your own purposes. So I mean, I've briefly used Feedly. I don't really, which is a currently available tool to read RSS feeds. And of course, it has a lot of features going on. So it's kind of like in my own view. Okay, yeah, we got some comments coming in. Yeah, definitely we need to. So yeah, there's the actual like structure of, and I can zoom this in, structure of the RSS item. We definitely should cover that. And that's going to be a little bit limited by what RSS feeds actually give to us. So maybe we should examine that schema, if you will, too. But yeah, definitely what you have listed there, it's going to be a name. It's going to be a name of the source. Yep. Like article. I'm just going to call it article title for now. We'll look up the official schema names here. Yep, for sure. Date. And then the blurb is interesting. We might end up showing like an excerpt view, and then also the like, if available, the full article view. And that's up to the authors. If you're less familiar with RSS, that's up to the authors what they send in the RSS feed. Yep, exactly. They're not consistent. Oh, good point. Feed URL, maybe we might save that. It'll technically be available behind the scenes, but so yeah, we'll have to see. So this will be kind of a check for that if available, and we'll have to be able to handle that incoming HTML, which might be interesting when we get to that point. So definitely that structure the RSS item, but also like how we display our sources, or like, is this going to be just, are we going to categorize this? Should we have categories? So like latest updates, maybe you define your own categories, user defined categories. Like maybe I would have one for accessibility, CSS, what have you. And then, since it is, our own use app, right? So what view is most important to you? And you could customize this. And also, as we'll learn with looking at Eleventy, we can change this on a whim at any time, which is going to be pretty awesome. But we could say, so source structure. So maybe you do want to like just an overview list of what sources you're bringing in at all. Maybe we could, I think they pass along an icon, or we might have to do like a fetch for their favicon. We can try that out. We'll kind of discover what we can do there. Obviously their title, and maybe just, you could almost use this as a quick dashboard to your favorite things. Obviously there's bookmarks, and if you're like me, you have 6 windows and 20 tabs per window. So usually what you want to look at isn't too far away. So you source URL, and maybe those just generally click into the latest articles for that. I'm kind of having this picture in my head of what this looks like. So this could be that we list out all our sources on the homepage, or maybe we'll have to work. That's something we'll have to work through, is like, what does the navigation around this little app look like? Author, details. Because again, we'll check out the schema of what we can have there. That might be something we do pretty quick here, so we know what we could bring in. And I mean, that's the essential things. If we think about like features that we actually can do, the one thing I definitely would like feedback on is, because I'm looking at something like Feedly, and of course they have a database ultimately behind that. So you can do things like favorite or mark it as, save or unsave or read later. And we could handle some of that kind of thing. What's interesting to me, though, is since we are feeding this in as our own customized data sources in Eleventy, is we may work out a little bit different way to do that. We may just manage it a little bit more manually. But if we want to actually post it up to a website, so maybe you're actually would create this and you post it up to share with others what your RSS collection is, then maybe in that case we would want to use like maybe local storage or something to allow people to favorite and have some of that functionality. I did mention we could look at serverless functions, so we could consider posting it to, one of the serverless compatible databases that have a generous free tier and that kind of thing. So definitely some options. Maybe we should just add a possible features. Feature kitchen sink. So let's see, I said local storage or serverless for features like saving articles, read later, some sort of way. I would say in either case, regardless of how we handle it, like, yeah, favorites, good call. And that may be like both favorite, like individual item. So like a particular article. The funny thing is I don't know if we'd have favorite sources because again, you're designing the whole thing, but maybe you would have a favorites category. But the categories I think we're going to manage different and not handle like through the UI. We'll actually like manually define what our categories hold, which we'll get there. But yeah, still, if you're pushing it out and allowing other people to interact with it, if we're allowing other people to interact with it, that's where, I think it was Jace said, having the feed URL would be useful, so someone else could grab that. Which actually, this one should be permalink. We need a way to actually click into that source, and then under the source structure, the source URL is like the site. I'll say site URL and then feed URL. What's interesting about search for this particular project is I'm not sure we're going to like create collections or like create copies of the data locally. And that's something else that's going to be a little interesting to work through. Are we going to show, so we have to decide if we show like, decide what to show. We'll have a better title in a minute, but so are we showing like latest 10? Are we showing like for each source, or whatever, number that is? Are we showing all unread, in which case we need some mechanism to mark if they're read or not, and somehow have that communicate to our data source? And that's where it gets a little bit kind of funky to me, how we might manage that. We'll have to consider that. I think that's maybe the most useful, but anyway, if anybody else wants to think about that one, we'll definitely get there. It won't be today. If you're viewing it every day, latest 10 might work. And maybe we somehow do allow you to mark them as read, unread. But if you're not viewing it every day, you may miss some in the past if you have sources that are really, really active, like the bigger sources like Smashing or CSS Tricks is like, multiple articles a day. So kind of an interesting little problem when we're thinking about this as a static site and not something dynamic and not something that already has a database attached. So, it might be something where just for this starter's purpose, we just do latest 10 and then we'll see how far we get with that, and then see if we want to try to build out a little more full-featured way to handle that particular part of this. A checkbox to mark it as read. Yeah. So I said read later, but also yes. So read, unread, toggle of some kind. Okay, so let's jump out. Let me find a source to show us what's in an RSS item. I mean, like the essential parts are title, description, possibility of an image link, but let's see. So the channel or the feed can have a title, link, and description. And then additionally, they can list, okay, what's useful here? Maybe the category, maybe, if that's like a maybe a somewhat standard list of things. You can find that out. So their own image. So that's what we were kind of thinking of if they supply an image, or we might have to fetch a favicon. I don't know. Maybe that's intended to be the same thing. Oh, I see. Does it have dimension requirements? Oh, yep, it does. Okay, so it's kind of like probably intended to be, it's bigger than a favicon, but sort of like a app icon or something. Okay, so I think that, let's see, did we learn anything new? We learned that our source can have an image up to 140 by 144 by 400. So one thing about Eleventy, which I should maybe mention earlier than later, is that we have a couple options when it comes to consuming these RSS feeds. We could completely do the work of like creating our own functions, but Eleventy allows you to use JavaScript or Node, which means we have access to any Node packages to help us consume the RSS feed, and then we can transform that and turn it into content. So we won't have to like manually go through the exercise of like pulling out each of these parts ourselves. We're going to pick a existing package that already does the parsing for us, the initial parsing of these feeds, and then we'll just do some transforms of it to create a format we want to consume for our site display. Hopefully that makes sense. It'll make more sense when we get to it, but mostly what I meant by that is we're not going to worry too much about like memorizing what's available here. I'm mostly glancing over the list right now to see like, are we missing something that we should consider as we're, considering the features of this. Considering like for your own personal use, you're building an RSS reader. What are the top features that you would like it to have? Considering that you also have full control over how the application is even built. To me, I mentioned it earlier, but for the new folks, like it's kind of a little bit of a switch of what we're doing here. We're not thinking necessarily about building a UI to handle certain features like categorizing or adding feeds or some of these other things. But instead, we're thinking of how do we configure our Eleventy application to bring in these RSS sources. And then once we have that data, we're mostly worried about how is it going to display in a way that, as ourself being our primary user, how do we want to consume that content? Like, how is this actually going to be useful for us as an RSS reader? Have you considered keeping track of the last time you accessed the feed? That's really interesting. I'm going to throw that under this section because I think we'd have to do either a local storage or function, just because otherwise we'd have to manually type that somewhere. Because of how builds and things works, I think. But interesting idea. Last accessed or last, well, that's kind of two different things, isn't it? Last accessed of the feed, and then last read, which could be an item or like basically your stopping point in a feed. And then I don't know if that's useful, but anyway, we'll throw it on there in a individual feed. Which that makes me think of another point that we have to consider is kind of the general architecture here. And sorry for anybody that this is kind of stressing out, that I'm just like making a giant to-do list. But I don't have any design programs. I'm not a designer. And so I usually do this way instead of trying to make boxes. This is my wireframe, is what I'm saying. So if an article only sends down an excerpt, do something to fetch the full content. And that would be possible and kind of interesting to do as just a little Eleventy challenge. Fetch full article if only excerpt is provided. Okay, so app architecture, we need a home screen, which that's where we already have a question like, is that showing sources? Is that showing latest? We can decide. And again, with Eleventy, we can totally change our mind. If we go down one path, we can change it super easily. And I say that with confidence and with joy because my other experiences include Gatsby and WordPress, and as primary other experiences. And well, anyway, I actually find it joyful to do in Eleventy. So we'll just leave it at that for now. Can't wait for you to find out what I mean if you're newer to Eleventy. Okay, so then a home screen, and then I imagine a essentially page per feed source, maybe a page per category. And this is where it gets back to our idea of like, you're building this for yourself. So how do we want to consume this? Right? Like we have full control over the prioritization of this content. And maybe we build out all these paths just as a learning exercise, but then talk about how you could combine those views. So that's the other thing is this is definitely a learning exercise too. We don't have to necessarily build it one way and say this is the way. We can modify it and build a few different paths, explore a few different views essentially of our RSS data. So Eleventy has extremely fast builds. I'm thinking about that one a little bit more. I'm like, it has extremely fast builds. It's only at, it only pulls that data at build time, at least in like a production build. So one time. That one might make it chug a little bit. It'll be interesting. It depends on how many sources we have and how we would go about that. Interesting challenge. I'm kind of glancing over at Feedly to see if there's any other maybe features. Like they have a recently read. I think we called that something different. The last read, I think, is maybe a similar idea. Let's see. Back up on our source, so like where we're displaying all our sources. Maybe like a number. What do you think? A number of new or number unread? Or do you want both those numbers? Because new, that's where we would need to know. It's scrolled away, but whoever suggested the last accessed, that actually will be pretty important, won't it? So we can actually track this new idea, which I think is one of the key features of an RSS reader, actually, at least in terms of how I want to use it. So if you have other ideas of like, how are you using an RSS reader? Is it more to get like a kind of overview of what kind of content's been produced? Just kind of keep general tabs on your favorite authors and whatnot. Or how are you using it? Like, that'd be awesome if anybody wants to share in the chat. That might help us come up with some other ways to approach this. There's a lot of you in chat, so we could get some good ideas. I'm just kind of scanning over this list. So we talked about the structure of the RSS item. I think let's see. Do we have an option for an image here? Not necessarily. For the individual entry, I mean. However, the description could include images, which we already talked about. We'll have to handle the incoming. That's kind of a feature down here. We'll have to handle incoming HTML, which will be interesting. I don't know how Feedly does it, but I know the types of items. I wonder if that's coming from the category. You bring up a good point too, that a podcast feed is a little bit different. Do we want to support podcast feeds? That might be something after we kind of get kind of these essential features, we maybe add that in. And YouTube has RSS feeds too. So we might have to go like do a little bit of scouting around, like see what kind of sources we have coming in. So maybe this is not completely, you'd think this would be exhaustive of the standard RSS feeds. Is the YouTube one, does that have different categories? Is there a video, whatever, metadata tag meta tag, or are they just like doing title and link? I think I just skipped around 3 different thoughts, but this is this is how I work. In fact, I'm having to. It's interesting to do this for me as an exercise because, I usually whiz around about 4 different virtual screens between different things, code a little bit, pick a color, come back to my list, write down a random idea, get as far as I can with the coding, get some HTML thrown out. So, yes, I'm forcing myself to do it a lot more structured for this feed so I don't bounce around and be unfollowable. Will the Eleventy site be rebuilt and deployed when the RSS changes, or can the RSS and Eleventy site update independently? Really interesting question, and I think that it depends. So at the very beginning of the stream, I kind of mentioned that there's 2 ways we can view how this application will be ultimately used. My initial thought when I first had the idea, and just because of my personal history with Eleventy, is that it's something I would just kind of run locally when I wanted to like check in on things. So in that case, we definitely would want it to like fetch at the same time because we just wanted to go ahead and freshen the data at that time. But if we do decide to push it up in a way or make it so that it can be more broadly shared like as an application online, then it kind of depends on where we host it, I think, because some hosts are offering different features that would make us able to separate those processes. Because of the fact, I say that, let me clarify that, because of the fact that Eleventy in particular, out of the box, does not do any client-side rendering. So we don't have a out of the box way to do that fetch. We could add it. We could change how that gets processed. We lose some of the benefits of using Eleventy if we do that, though. I'm not sure if that answered your question. It kind of depends on the outcome, basically, is the answer to, do we fetch it on build time, which would be the default, or can we leverage some other features to like do an on-demand request? And that's kind of a little bit reliant on hosting to make that happen. All right, so we talked about what's in the RSS item as a starting point. And these must just be I thought they were separated. So it looks like they're just kind of generically description. And then you may get an excerpt or you may get a full article. Let me see what I have for the Eleventy Rocks feed. I guess I could have done this a while ago. Let me zoom in. So this is based on, it's an Atom feed. So that's interesting. Someone said RSS 2.0. So this is Atom because I pulled it initially from Zach's version on the Eleventy like official starter. So now I'm interested. Now I got to do a little more research on the differences between those and what's more likely to be used, or and then for each one, okay, so it's actually so for Atom it's a content tag. So yeah, and then they actually define that it's HTML coming in here. So again, we're not actually going to create a method ourselves to parse RSS. We're going to pull in or use a node package that pulls it in. So maybe we'll just find one that can handle either case of Atom or the RSS 2.0 or whatever. And maybe it'll handle podcast ones too. And then we'll just kind of essentially check the return object and, do what we need to do. So we'll find out. That'll help kind of guide that decision. But either way, same idea in terms of what information is here. So Thursday we'll actually get our Eleventy project started, kind of generally talk about that, start to build it. And in the meantime, if you are interested in learning more about Eleventy, so that if you have questions as we go along or are interested in what general features it offers, I'll pop this in the chat one more time. But I have a lot of resources out here. I think this is definitely a good starting point. It gives us a lot to think about when we approach getting started with our Eleventy project. We will spend the majority of Thursday talking or creating the initial architecture for this. We'll explore actually getting these RSS feeds as a source, kind of look at how they can transform. We'll probably start by building our essential templates and then also look at how to start pulling these in, and how to pull them in and transform them into data might extend to a third stream. And then once we kind of have things displaying across templates and that feels okay and manageable and extendable, then we can, style it up. So that will be kind of the end of the project. So that way we don't get too hung up on choosing fonts and colors and so forth.